When Cyberpunk 2077 released back in 2020, it was described by some as the single worst launch of a AAA game in history. Cyberpunk 2077 became something of a cautionary tale about keeping your hype in check and never ever pre-ordering. 3 years after the disastrous launch of Cyberpunk 2077, the expansion Phantom Liberty finally released. What Phantom Liberty represents today is more than just a simple redemption arc. It's not only one of the best expansions I've ever played, but it's also managed to achieve something, for me at least, that no other RPG in recent memory has. The journey of Cyberpunk 2077 is a story unlike any other, and now, 1 year later, I think it's a great time to look at the highs of Phantom Liberty, the lows of Phantom Liberty, what's actually changed since the launch of Cyberpunk 2077, and whether or not Phantom Liberty actually lived up to the gargantuan expectations of saving the very company that almost destroyed it. This is Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty, 1 year later. Cyberpunk 2077 was one of my most anticipated releases of all time. A Blade Runner-inspired dystopian future crafted by the developers of arguably one of the greatest RPGs ever made, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. The hype for Cyberpunk 2077 reached almost GTA levels of anticipation. The promotional materials were promising a deep, dark, and beautifully crafted RPG with complex NPC AI that have their own day and night cycles. A city with multiple accessible interiors and engaging side quests with meaningful choice and consequence. But there was some skepticism around the game as well. Many reputable reviewers that saw early builds of the game had some serious doubts about the viability of it actually running smoothly on the base model PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Some claiming even as early as 2 years before the release that Cyberpunk 2077 was never meant to release on consoles. So when the review code started going out and no one received a console code, well, alarm bells started going off. It took but a mere 10 minutes after the official launch of Cyberpunk for Twitter to be flooded with videos of janky NPCs, cars flying across and falling through the map, and some people not even getting past the prologue. I for one was heartbroken. This was the first game in a long time that genuinely got me swept up in the hype, and it released in such a terrible state. I played for less than 4 hours on launch day before refunding the game. Now, there was no denying that Cyberpunk 2077 had the foundations of a great game, but it was clearly rushed out the door before it was ready. The irony of corporate greed ruining the launch of Cyberpunk 2077, a game based on themes of corporate greed, deception, and capitalism, it never ceases to amaze me. Fast forward to 14 months after the initial launch, and the next-gen update for Cyberpunk releases on the 15th of February 2022 for PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series consoles. The reception to this update was overall positive, and this would be the first time that I finally got to play the entire game through from beginning to end, hopefully bug-free and in a relatively perfect state. And it was, well, it wasn't perfect. It was certainly way better than before, but I did still experience a ton of bugs, with quests that simply didn't work and often some very questionable visual pop-in. A ton of bad systems that released with the initial launch of the game still plagued the next-gen version, like the bad to non-existent police system, the terrible driving mechanics, clothes still being tied to protection and damage stats so you end up looking like a crazy person, and then the skill tree that made some playstyles really unsatisfying. It wasn't all bad though. When the game worked, it was filled with characters you grew to love and a city that promised so much, but it often felt like it was just on the brink of greatness. Greatness that was at this point still a year away. I was cautiously optimistic for the expansion after experiencing the base game, especially since they were going for a spy story, and me being a massive James Bond and Mission Impossible fan, this sounded like something straight up my alley. What I wasn't prepared for though was just how much I would love this expansion, and how it would take Cyberpunk 2077 from a game I liked to now a game that I regard as up there with some of the greatest RPGs ever made. I know that seems like very high praise, and I promise I will get to the problems I still have with Cyberpunk, but for now, I want to start with the highs of Phantom Liberty. The story. In Phantom Liberty, players are introduced to a new district known as Dogtown. The narrative involves a complex plot of deception where V undertakes a mission for the new United States of America for the possibility of saving his own life. with significant new characters like the secret agent Solomon Reed, played brilliantly by Idris Elba, and Songbird by the fantastic Minji Chang, both of whom which potentially act as an ally or adversary to V within this espionage-centric storyline. The reason Phantom Liberty works so well on a narrative front is because of these two characters. And the thing that I alluded to that Phantom Liberty does better than most RPGs in recent memory is getting you to actually care about the choices you are actively making. They do this in a couple of ways, but the biggest contributing factor to this feeling is the combination of great, interconnected and subtextual writing and expertly designed animation work. The thing with RPGs is that we usually cut them some slack. We realize that to run a game this massive with so many intricate systems, it would be unreasonable to expect Naughty Dog levels of animation work in the cutscenes and NPC interactions. That's why I don't get too upset when Starfield's NPCs look a little stiff or when the companion NPC's movements aren't always that natural. But that's also why when I tell you that Phantom Liberty not only achieves this realism but excels at it, I really mean it. You care for Songbird and Solomon Reed because they act real, they walk real, they pause for a brief moment of contemplation real, they lie for real, and they tell the truth for real. But because they feel so real, you'll almost always question whether or not what they just told you was the truth. I always wished for a game with deep, meaningful choices and role-playing systems like The Witcher 3, whilst having cutscenes like The Last of Us. Totally an unreasonable expectation for sure, but achieved by Phantom Liberty. The spy narrative of Phantom Liberty leans into the who can you really trust aspect of espionage. The inevitable cluster of bad decisions coming to haunt me at the end of the expansion was nothing short of remarkable and extremely depressing. I won't say anything more than that, but I'll just tell you that I got the bad ending. I also like that Phantom Liberty also slows things down for a bit. The relentless pace of the main campaign was always jarring to me. V is actually dying and you need to find the cure, so why would you stop to join a gang or help a random politician if the clock on your life is actually ticking? The narrative always felt at odds with what the world was actually telling you to do, which was explore and immerse yourself in Night City. I wanted to walk around and just take in the sights, but I always felt like I needed to forget what the narrative of the main campaign was in order to truly enjoy what I was doing outside of it. Phantom Liberty thankfully takes a very different approach, where your life is no longer the most important thing. The search for Songbird is, and almost everything you do inside and outside of that narrative feeds into the story. When you do side gigs in Dogtown, it's to pass the time till Reed contacts you again, or to gain an informant to help you in your search for Songbird. Nothing, and I really do mean nothing, in Phantom Liberty is wasted content or simply filler. It all feeds back into the narrative and the feeling of being an actual spy. The base game of Cyberpunk also talks a lot about the criminal underbelly of the city. It references the politicians, the gangs, and the big evil corporations, but it never really feels all that accessible. It feels often more like set dressing than anything you can truly interact with. The closest you'll really ever get is with one of the best side quests in the main game, where you help out this politician called Jefferson Perales. But in Phantom Liberty, you are directly interacting with the criminal underbelly and seeing things far worse than anything you saw in the base game. You get to make choices and leave lasting impressions on not only Dogtown but Night City as a whole. You are often caught in these ethical conundrums where your choice to save or lie to one person could often mean harming another. Do you save this one kid from a life of trafficking if it means that him and every other kid there will end up homeless? This choice and many more leave you between choosing one evil over another. Two wrongs never make a right, but in Night City, two wrongs is often the best you're gonna get. In the end, it all ties back to the themes of deception and loyalty. Do you trust Reed or do you trust Songbird? This lies at the core of what makes Phantom Liberty so great. Both these characters are equally complex, with both of them trying to manipulate or appeal to the part of you that is still human. The story of Phantom Liberty is grand in scope, but also so deep and melancholic. Initially hearing it takes place during the events of the main campaign, I was a little disappointed because I wanted something totally different. But now with hindsight, I can totally say it was the right decision. It's because now there is more meat to Cyberpunk 2077. In fact, Phantom Liberty to me feels less like a totally separate expansion and more of an extension to the base game. To me, Phantom Liberty and Cyberpunk 2077 are now one game because it all interconnects so beautifully. You can use your contacts you made in the base game to help out in side quests in Phantom Liberty. You can talk to your partner about what's happening in Dogtown and what you're involved in. You hear about something in Night City and chances are you will interact with said thing in Phantom Liberty. It's so smart and well designed that if I were to give one person that still hasn't played Cyberpunk 2077 any piece of advice, it would be to play it as if Phantom Liberty was always part of the main game. And to wrap up my thoughts on the story, I think it's beautiful, I think it's melancholic, I think it's heartbreaking, and I think it's one of the best stories I've experienced in a game in a long time. The music. Music in Phantom Liberty isn't just for the background. Here it often takes to the forefront. Moments where the story is hitting its crescendo, or when you're undercover at a party filled with the criminal elite, all get even more of an emotional and immersive boost with the music. Lizzie Wizzy's full performance at the party you are undercover at is still one of my favorite gaming moments I've had in the last couple of years. At this point in the narrative, things are at a breaking point and the stakes are next level. You are undercover and under extreme pressure, but for a brief moment you just get to slow down and listen and watch this fully animated performance. I think the best part for me is that it's totally optional. You could just go straight to read here and miss the entire performance, but for me at least, I stayed. I listened to the performance and thought of everything V had been through to get to this point. The loss, the heartache, the sheer beauty and horror of this dark future all displayed in one melancholic performance on a stage in the most dangerous place in Dogtown. It genuinely felt like playing the very best scene from one of my favorite spy films of all time. When Phantom Liberty ended, I'm not over-exaggerating when I say I was left in total shock. After having gone through this emotional roller coaster of a narrative and then having the credits begin with the main theme song of Phantom Liberty playing, reminiscent of a classic James Bond title sequence, I genuinely started crying. Now I know how that sounds, but when expert design, writing, music and finally a true vision all intertwined to create something this special, sometimes you just have to sit back and realize why gaming is truly the best medium for storytelling. That's why I cried. I loved these characters, I made some bad decisions, and I lived a journey in Dogtown that for a brief moment, to me at least, meant something. When those credits rolled, I felt a deep sense of longing. A longing that I really haven't experienced playing any prior game. I missed Solomon Reed, I missed Songbird. Night City somehow felt different leaving Dogtown. I felt small, like Night City just kept moving on while I just stood completely still, frozen in place by the events that just transpired in Dogtown. Night City is a hauntingly beautiful yet disturbingly evil place, but leaving Dogtown, for the first time, it actually felt like coming home. What has changed in 4 years? With Phantom Liberty came Cyberpunk 2077's final updates, all culminating in patch 2.0 and 2.1. The main point of these patches, one word, immersion. Night City now is probably the only game I go back to just to be in its beautifully designed city, but it wasn't always like this. Unfortunately, at the start when Cyberpunk 2077 first launched, it was nothing more than just nice set dressing. NPCs didn't have schedules, in fact most of the NPCs all looked the same. You couldn't interact with Night City in any meaningful way outside of the main campaign. Your choices in the game largely didn't matter except for determining your specific ending to the main campaign. And this world they worked so hard to craft felt littered with checklist gaming with loot spamming and random pop-ups of the same gang fight over and over again. This game, for a lack of a better word, actually just felt like a game. A far cry from being the most immersive RPG ever made like it was hyped up to be. Now, after patch 2.1 and Phantom Liberty, Cyberpunk has finally reached its full immersive potential, adding a fully working police system, changes to the skill tree that make different playstyles not only fun but encouraged. You know that train that we saw in the very first reveal trailer of Cyberpunk that never got into the final game? Yeah, well, they added it. A fully operational metro system. Was it unnecessary? Yeah. Was it amazing? Also yeah. Sure, you can't walk around in the train, but just the mere fact that you can get on the train, sit and watch as the city goes on with its day as you travel through it, man, it's just truly something special, and the developers at CD Projekt Red really deserve some love and attention for how much effort they put into things some people might never interact with. All for the sake of increasing player immersion. Gone are the stats for clothes, now you just wear what you want, driving feels amazing, NPCs look and act more alive, and the world feels more full, with random events and crime scenes occurring all around this dystopian future. With the latest patch came one of my favorite things to do in the game. using my portable radio as I simply walk the streets of Night City. The soundtracks in this game are that good, and the vibes in Night City are that immaculate. I also just want to touch on the gameplay, which is something that can be very hit or miss in most RPGs. Skyrim or Fallout 3, for example, was never celebrated for the amazing gameplay, but instead remembered for the stories they told. In Cyberpunk 2077, you actually get both. This isn't just my favorite RPG on a narrative front, it's my favorite RPG on a gameplay front as well. There are so many viable playstyles in this game it can sometimes feel overwhelming, but with the updated skill tree it's definitely more digestible. I love the combat in this game, and if replaying the story for its multiple different endings isn't enough, well now you have a reason to go back and experience it just to build a different V. My first playthrough I went full hacker mode, and in my second I went katanas and pistols. It's so refreshing to play a game that not only allows experimentation but actively encourages it. Have you seen some of those crazy montages of a guy that absolutely mastered the gameplay and makes it look like a scene out of the Matrix? Yeah, I'm actually afraid to admit how many times those videos alone convinced me to re-download the game. The lows. I only have a few gripes, and at this point it does feel like I'm nitpicking, but nonetheless I am going to include it. One of my gripes is that the dialogue choices for V often don't reflect in what tone he's actually going to say the thing. Oh, so you think he's going to say this thing that you just clicked in a nice way? Well, guess what, now Johnny Silverhand hates you. I think maybe including a tone indicator would have helped. Luckily though, in Phantom Liberty this is less of a problem. And finally, I still largely dislike the trope of having me as V be in the position of searching for a cure as I'm slowly dying. As I previously mentioned, it feels at odds with what the world is actively telling you to do, which is slow down and mingle with the wonderful cast of Night City. I'm sorry, but if I'm actually on the brink of dying, I don't think I have the time to do these random ass races in the city. I mean, sure, it's gonna be fun, but bro, I'm dying. And that's about it. The list of cons used to be so long, but after patch 2.0 and 2.1 and finally Phantom Liberty, the list has shrunk down to nothing more than just very menial gripes. Returning to Night City now feels different because it finally feels complete. It feels like this was what they always wanted the game to be. The first launch was its beta test, and now nearly 4 years after its first launch, I finally get to not only congratulate it but celebrate it. Phantom Liberty is a monumental accomplishment in game design, story, and honestly developer perseverance. I know seeing their game release in the state it did back in 2020 must have really hurt the developers, and now they finally get the recognition they always deserved. I love Phantom Liberty, not just cause it's a great expansion, but it fixed the dream I always had for this game. The hype certainly got the better of me, but isn't that oftentimes the best part of gaming? The anticipation, the longing for a new trailer or screenshot, those months of silence and anticipation for any news or leaks, those long conversations with friends about what the game could be when it finally releases, and then the inevitable reality check when it actually does. I lost that excitement and genuine optimism for gaming the day Cyberpunk launched in its broken state. I regained it all the day Phantom Liberty launched. Now, as silly as it may be, I again long for a new trailer, a new screenshot and a new leak. A new conversation with a friend about a game that has yet to be released. But for now, as I wait for the next big thing, I can go back to Night City, knowing that it's finally the city of my dreams.